What happens when love and power collide on the same movie set? In 1975, actress Sondra Locke thought she'd found both romance and destiny in the arms of Clint Eastwood, Hollywood's most untouchable man. Together, they looked like a dream, the stoic cowboy and the luminous ingenue. But behind the camera, that dream became a trap. What started as passion turned into possession. What began as mentorship became manipulation. And by the time it ended, Locke's career, once full of promise, was in ashes, erased by the very man who claimed to love her. This is not a tabloid story. It's a Hollywood case study in power and how a legend built his empire while quietly dismantling the woman who stood beside him. Before Hollywood called her name, she was Sandra Louise Smith, born May 28, 1944, in Shelbyville, Tennessee. A small-town girl with sharp wit, a relentless drive, and a hunger for something more than what the South could offer. Her mother, Pauline, was a working-class woman who remarried a man named Alfred Locke. He gave Sondra her surname, but not her identity. She built that herself. In high school, she was everything: cheerleader, basketball player, honor student. But beyond the uniforms and trophies, she was captivated by performance. Teachers recalled a young woman who could command attention with a single glance. After graduation, she attended Middle Tennessee State University, majoring in drama, though the classroom couldn't contain her ambition. She dropped out and headed for the stage. When she adopted the stage name Sondra Locke, she did it with intention. It sounded elegant, assertive, cinematic. And it worked. In 1968, she landed her first major film role in The Heart is a Lonely Hunter, opposite Alan Arkin. It was a tender, understated performance that earned her an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actress and a Golden Globe nomination. Overnight, Hollywood knew her name. Critics compared her to Shirley MacLaine and Faye Dunaway, women who could balance vulnerability with steel. It should have been the beginning of a long, unstoppable career. Instead, it became the high point she would spend the next 2 decades trying to reach again. In 1973, Locke auditioned for Clint Eastwood's film Breezy. She didn't get the role; the part went to a younger actress. But she caught Eastwood's attention. He reportedly told colleagues there was something special about that girl. He didn't forget her. 3 years later, while casting the outlaw Josie Wales, Eastwood remembered Locke and gave her a supporting role. On set, their chemistry was undeniable. She was 31, intelligent and self-possessed. He was 45, one of the most bankable men in the world. They began an affair that quickly became more than just another Hollywood fling. There was one problem: both were married. Locke's marriage, however, was not what it seemed. She had wed her childhood friend Gordon League Anderson, a gay artist, in what she later described as a compassionate arrangement. They shared deep friendship, not romance, and remained legally married for the rest of her life. Eastwood, meanwhile, was still married to his first wife, Maggie Johnson, with whom he had 2 children. When their affair became public, it caused a quiet earthquake in Hollywood. The tabloids smelled scandal, but Eastwood was untouchable, and the story was quickly sanitized, reframed as a love story between 2 artists who couldn't resist each other. To Sondra, it felt like destiny. To Hollywood, it looked like validation. If Clint Eastwood loved her, she must be something extraordinary. But behind closed doors, the dynamic was already forming, one where Clint was the sun, and she was expected to orbit around him. From 1976 through the early 1980s, Sondra Locke appeared in a string of Eastwood's films: The Gauntlet, Every Which Way But Loose, Any Which Way You Can, Bronco Billy, and Sudden Impact. Each movie cemented Eastwood's image as the rugged American anti-hero, and each time, Locke played the woman beside him, the love interest, the sidekick, the symbol of tenderness in a world of violence. On paper, she was a co-star. In reality, she was a supporting character in his real life and his real life. Their on-screen chemistry was electric, but off-screen, a different story was unfolding. Locke began turning down outside offers, not because she wanted to, but because Clint reportedly discouraged it. He wanted her available for his projects, not others. She later told friends that when she tried to audition elsewhere, he'd get cold or withdrawn. "I thought he wanted to protect me," she said years later. "But really, he wanted to own me." Their partnership became a paradox. To the world, she was Eastwood's muse. To herself, she was his employee. And Hollywood saw her that way too. Casting agents stopped calling, assuming she wouldn't be allowed to take roles outside the Eastwood bubble. By 1980, her name was fading from independent credits. She was no longer Sondra Locke, Oscar nominee. She was simply Clint Eastwood's girlfriend. Yet even then, she still believed in him and in the idea that love could coexist with creative freedom. She was wrong. By the mid-1980s, Locke was restless. Acting in Clint's films no longer satisfied her. She wanted to direct. Eastwood had built a second career as a respected filmmaker, and she wanted the same opportunity. At first, he seemed supportive, or at least indifferent, and agreed to help produce her debut. That film was Rat Boy, 1986, a surreal fantasy about a woman who befriends a half-human, half-rat creature. It was bizarre, ambitious, and deeply personal, a fable about loneliness and acceptance. Warner Brothers released it quietly. Critics were confused. Audiences ignored it. The film flopped. But for Locke, Rat Boy represented freedom. She had done something without Clint in front of the camera, but not without his shadow behind it. The movie was produced by his company, Malpaso Productions, and distributed through his longtime studio partner, Warner Brothers. Later, she would admit, "I begged Clint not to be involved. I knew our relationship would cause issues, but he couldn't let go. He had to be part of it." Their creative partnership collapsed soon after. She wanted autonomy. He wanted control. She wanted to be a filmmaker. He wanted her to remain his co-star. And by 1989, that tension turned into war. In early 1989, while Locke was directing her second film, Impulse, she returned home one day to find her locks changed literally. Clint Eastwood had locked her out of their shared Bel Air home. There was no warning, no discussion, just eviction. Their 15-year relationship was over. Locke filed a palimony lawsuit, claiming Eastwood had promised her lifelong financial and professional support. The suit alleged that he had controlled her career, manipulated her opportunities, and effectively destroyed her independence. It was a bold move, suing one of the most beloved men in America. The media frenzy was instant. Headlines painted her as the scorned woman. Tabloids called it Hollywood's ugliest breakup. Eastwood remained silent, maintaining his stoic cowboy image. Locke, meanwhile, was ridiculed, but she refused to back down. Eventually, the two settled out of court. Locke received ownership of the Bel Air house and a 3-year, $1.5 million development deal at Warner Brothers. It was meant to help her direct and produce films independently, a peace offering that, on paper, looked generous. But it was anything but. When Locke walked into Warner Brothers after her settlement, she felt hope for the first time in years. Finally, she thought, she could start over. She developed scripts, met with writers, pitched projects. Every proposal was rejected. Months passed, then years. Nothing moved forward. Executives avoided her calls. Projects she nurtured like Junior, which later became an Arnold Schwarzenegger comedy, were greenlit years later with other people attached. Something didn't add up. Then, in 1995, Locke discovered what had happened. The entire deal, her supposed second chance, had been orchestrated by Clint Eastwood himself. Internal memos showed that Eastwood had reimbursed Warner Brothers for the cost of her contract. The studio had never intended to produce her films. The deal existed only to keep her occupied and quiet. She filed a second lawsuit, accusing Eastwood of fraud and claiming that the studio arrangement was a sham meant to sabotage her career. In her deposition, Locke said, "It wasn't about money. It was about my name, my work, my right to exist as a filmmaker." The case settled privately, again. But the truth was out. Clint Eastwood had not just left her, he had effectively blacklisted her. After the second lawsuit, Sondra Locke vanished from the industry's radar. She directed two small projects, the TV movie Death in Small Doses, 1995, and the independent crime drama Trading Favors, 1997. Both went virtually unnoticed. She would later say that Hollywood had closed its doors. Directors and producers who had once been friendly stopped taking meetings. Even agents distanced themselves. Industry insiders whispered that Clint Eastwood's influence ran deep, that no one wanted to risk angering him by helping her. One producer at Warner Brothers was quoted anonymously saying, "Clint's a legend. You don't cross him, not for anyone." And so, Sondra Locke, once an Oscar-nominated actress and emerging director, was quietly erased. For years, she lived a reclusive life, still legally married to her best friend Gordon Anderson. Despite everything, she remained gracious in interviews, even when discussing Eastwood. She admitted to heartbreak, but also to understanding. "He's a man who needs control. I was a woman who wanted freedom. Those two things can't live in the same house." But the cost of that freedom was everything she had built. While fighting her professional battles, Locke faced an even more personal one. In the late 1980s, she was diagnosed with breast cancer. She underwent surgery and treatment while simultaneously fighting Eastwood in court. She rarely spoke about her illness publicly, but friends said it took a toll on her spirit. Despite remission, the damage lingered. She described that period as a war on two fronts, my body and my name. Still, she didn't stop working. In the 2000s, she tried producing smaller projects, often mentoring young filmmakers who admired her resilience. But her name carried a weight few in the industry wanted to touch. In 2015, nearly 3 decades after Ratboy, she returned to producing with Knock Knock, a remake of her 1977 thriller Death Game. The new version, directed by Eli Roth and starring Keanu Reeves, was an unexpected full-circle moment. Though her role was behind the scenes, it felt symbolic, a creative voice, refusing to die quietly. In 2017, she made her final on-screen appearance in Ray Meets Helen, a small romantic film about second chances. It was fitting, her last role in a story about two people rediscovering hope. But the hope didn't last. On November 3, 2018, Sondra Locke died of cardiac arrest at her Los Angeles home, caused by complications from breast and bone cancer. She was 74 years old. Her death went unreported for 6 weeks. No Hollywood tributes, no obituaries. It wasn't until December 13th, the day before the release of Clint Eastwood's film, The Mule, that the news broke. By then, Eastwood was promoting his new project, smiling on red carpets, giving interviews. He never issued a public statement about Locke's passing. Not a quote. Not a word. It was the final silence, a silence that echoed louder than any apology could. Locke's death was confirmed by her lifelong friend and legal husband, Gordon Anderson. They had remained close for decades, a friendship that endured when everything else fell away. After her death, tributes began to surface. Former co-stars remembered her kindness. Fans rediscovered her early work. Critics reappraised Ratboy as an underrated feminist allegory. For the first time in years, her name was spoken with respect, not as Clint Eastwood's ex, but as a woman who had dared to stand up to power. Sondra Locke's story isn't a cautionary tale about romance. It's a mirror reflecting how easily talent can be controlled, minimized, or erased when it threatens the wrong person. In her memoir, The Good, the Bad, and the Very Ugly, she wrote, "I fought not just for myself, but for every woman who ever tried to tell the truth in a world built to ignore her." Today, her legacy has begun to shift. Film historians now cite her as an early example of what would later be recognized as the blacklisting by influence, a silent punishment used by studios and powerful men to bury inconvenient women. When Me Too emerged decades later, Locke's story resurfaced. Younger actresses began to see her not as a footnote in Eastwood's biography, but as a whistleblower before her time. If she were alive today, perhaps she would have received the recognition she deserved, not just for surviving Clint Eastwood, but for outlasting his silence. In Hollywood, legends are built on myth. Clint Eastwood's myth was Power, the lone cowboy, the man who never flinches. Sondra Locke's tragedy was that she loved that myth and believed it loved her back. But when power meets resistance, someone always loses. She believed she'd found her partner in art and life. Instead, she found the limits of both. Her story isn't just about betrayal. It's about what happens when a woman's success depends on the approval of the man beside her. And yet, in her quiet defiance, Sondra Locke won something Clint Eastwood never could. The truth. The truth that power can silence a voice for a time, but it can't erase it forever. So, the next time you see her face flicker across an old movie screen, remember the story behind the smile. Remember the woman who fought back. And remember how Hollywood, for all its glamour, still hides the shadows of those it tried to forget.